The rain fell in sheets that night, but Olivia didn't flinch as she stood by the window, her gaze fixed on the stormy horizon. Behind her, the echo of Victoria's icy voice cut through the silence like a dagger. In the grand yet coldly unwelcoming manner, Olivia lived a life that many would envy from the outside. But within those gilded walls, she endured the cruelty of her stepmother Victoria. Olivia, with her gentle eyes and kind heart, was the very picture of grace and humility. Her days were spent working tirelessly, finding solace in the simplest acts of kindness, feeding the birds in the garden, helping the housemaid with her chores, or reading to the cook's young daughter. Victoria, on the other hand, was the embodiment of bitterness cloaked in wealth. She ruled the household with an iron fist, her disdain for Olivia fueled by jealousy. To Victoria, Olivia was a constant reminder of everything she couldn't have: beauty, virtue, and the love that once belonged to Olivia's late father. Despite the cruel treatment, Olivia's spirit remained unbroken, her heart quietly yearning for something more. What will happen when Olivia's kindness meets the storm brewing inside Victoria? And what secrets lie hidden within the walls of this foreboding manor? Make sure to watch till the end to uncover the twists in this tale. Don't forget to like this video and subscribe to the channel for more gripping stories. Late one evening, as Olivia cleaned the dusty shelves in the library, a task Victoria insisted she do daily, her fingers brushed against a strange envelope tucked behind an old book. Curious, she pulled it out, the yellowed parchment crinkling softly. The name on the front was unmistakable. It belonged to her father. Her heart raced. What was this letter doing here? And why had Victoria never mentioned it? Olivia clutched the mysterious letter in her trembling hands. She carefully tucked it into the pocket of her apron, her mind swirling with questions. Just as she resolved to read it in secret, the clock in the hall struck midnight, its chime echoing through the quiet manor. She quickly finished her task and slipped away to her small attic room, where she hoped for a moment of peace to uncover what the letter held. Miles away, in the heart of the bustling city, Ethan sat on a weathered bench beneath the flickering glow of a street lamp. The night was cold, biting through his thin coat, but Ethan refused to let the chill dampen his spirit. His worn boots rested against the cobblestones as he leaned back, gazing at the sky. Despite the darkness of his circumstances, he found comfort in the stars. Ethan had lived a hard life. He knew the sting of hunger and the weight of loneliness all too well. By day, he wandered the streets, hoping for spare change or a kind smile. By night, he sought shelter wherever he could, often sharing what little he had with others less fortunate. Yet, there was something about Ethan that set him apart from the other beggars, a quiet strength, a glimmer of hope that refused to fade. Tonight, however, something felt different. As he sat there, a small leather-bound journal rested on his lap. It was the only possession he treasured, a relic of a past he barely remembered. Inside were pages filled with fragmented memories, sketches, and words he couldn't quite piece together. Ethan often wondered who he had been before the streets became his home. A passerby dropped a coin into his tin cup, startling him out of his thoughts. "Thank you," he said warmly, his voice carrying a sincerity that surprised the stranger. The man nodded and hurried along, leaving Ethan to return to his journal. As he turned the pages, his eyes lingered on a sketch, a grand manor with tall iron gates and a sprawling garden. It was the same image that appeared in his dreams, always accompanied by a sense of longing he couldn't explain. Ethan's brow furrowed as he traced the outline of the gates with his finger. "Why does this place feel so familiar?" he murmured. The sound of approaching footsteps pulled him back to reality. A young boy, no older than 10, shuffled toward him with a torn blanket draped over his shoulders. Ethan smiled gently and motioned for the boy to sit beside him. "Here," Ethan said, handing him the remaining half of a stale loaf of bread. "You need this more than I do." The boy's eyes widened in gratitude as he accepted the bread. "Thank you, mister." Ethan chuckled softly. "Don't mention it. Always remember, kindness goes a long way." As the boy ate, Ethan's thoughts drifted back to the sketch in his journal. Somewhere deep down, he felt his life was about to change, though he couldn't yet see how. The morning sunlight filtered through the grand windows of the manor's dining room, casting golden streaks over the polished wooden table. Victoria sat at the head, sipping tea from a delicate porcelain cup, her sharp eyes scanning the room. Her mind, however, was elsewhere. The previous night had left her restless. Something about Olivia felt different. The girl had seemed unusually quiet, more distant than usual. Victoria's lips curled into a bitter smile. "Good," she muttered under her breath. She relished the thought of Olivia's spirit breaking piece by piece. Yet, there was more to be done. A girl as lovely as Olivia didn't deserve the praise and admiration she so effortlessly garnered from the staff, and even from those in society who dared to challenge Victoria's narrative about her stepdaughter. No, Olivia needed to be taught her place. By the time the housekeeper entered to clear the breakfast dishes, Victoria had already begun weaving a plan in her mind, a plan so cruel it made her chuckle softly. "Summon the tailor," she instructed without looking up. "We'll need something appropriate for Olivia." The housekeeper hesitated, sensing the underlying malice in Victoria's tone. "For what occasion, madam?" Victoria's gaze snapped to her, her expression icy. "Do I owe you an explanation, Mrs. Keene? Just do as you're told." The housekeeper bowed her head and hurried away, leaving Victoria alone to revel in her wicked thoughts. She would craft a narrative so humiliating that Olivia could never recover. The plan was simple: force her into an unthinkable marriage and let society believe it was Olivia's punishment for being an ungrateful, disobedient girl. And the perfect groom? A beggar from the streets, someone so far beneath Olivia that her shame would be eternal. Victoria had heard whispers about a man named Ethan. Though she didn't care for the details, she knew enough. He was penniless, wandering the streets, and easy to manipulate. He was the perfect pawn in her game. That evening, Victoria summoned her most loyal servant, Henry, to the drawing room. Henry was a wiry man, with shifty eyes, known for his discretion and willingness to do whatever it took to remain in Victoria's good graces. "I have a task for you," she began, her voice cold and commanding. "Find a man named Ethan. He lives on the streets, likely near the market district. Bring him to me, but ensure he understands this is a business opportunity." Henry raised an eyebrow but nodded quickly. "Yes, madam. Anything else?" "Only this," Victoria said, leaning forward. Her smile was thin, almost venomous. "Do not tell him who I am or why I want to meet him. That will come later." As Henry left the room, Victoria leaned back in her chair, feeling a twisted sense of satisfaction. Soon, the wheels of her plan would be in motion. Upstairs, oblivious to what was unfolding, Olivia sat in her attic room, still clutching the letter she had found. She hadn't yet dared to open it, but her heart whispered that it held the answers she had been searching for. The day Victoria announced the arrangement, Olivia felt the ground shift beneath her. She stood in the middle of the parlour, her hands clasped tightly in front of her, as Victoria coldly delivered the news. "You will marry Ethan," Victoria declared, her voice as sharp as a blade. "It's the only way to redeem yourself in the eyes of this household and society." Olivia's heart sank. She had heard whispers about Ethan, the beggar who roamed the streets near the market district. The thought of marriage to a stranger, and one of such low status, left her stunned. Yet she knew better than to argue. Victoria's punishments for defiance were harsh, and Olivia had no strength left to endure another round of her wrath. Swallowing her fear, Olivia nodded. "If that is your wish," she said softly, her voice trembling. Victoria smirked, clearly pleased with Olivia's submission. "Good. The wedding will take place in 3 days. You'll wear the dress I've had made for you. Nothing too extravagant, of course. It wouldn't suit the occasion." Olivia said nothing. Her head bowed as she fought to keep her composure. Once Victoria left the room, she allowed herself a moment to breathe. This wasn't what she had imagined for her life, but perhaps, just perhaps, there was a silver lining to be found. The day of the wedding arrived quickly. It was a modest affair, held in the garden behind the manor. The staff watched silently from the shadows, their hearts heavy for Olivia. Ethan stood at the altar, looking both out of place and nervous in the borrowed suit Victoria had provided. When Olivia appeared, her gentle smile masked the whirlwind of emotions inside her. She saw the unease in Ethan's eyes and the way his hands fidgeted at his sides. It was clear he hadn't chosen this path any more than she had. After the brief ceremony, Olivia approached Ethan. She held out her hand, offering a gesture of peace. "Hello, Ethan," she said kindly. "I'm Olivia." Ethan hesitated before shaking her hand. I don't know what to say," he admitted, his voice low. "I never expected something like this." "Neither did I," Olivia replied, her tone soft. "But we're here now. We'll figure it out together." Over the days that followed, Olivia's kindness began to chip away at Ethan's guarded demeanour. She brought him food from the kitchen, sewed patches into his worn coat, and listened to him speak of his life on the streets. Ethan was surprised by her warmth. He had expected scorn or indifference, but Olivia treated him as if he mattered, as if his presence wasn't a burden. One evening, as they sat together near the fireplace, Ethan looked at her and said, "You don't have to do all this." "I know you didn't want this marriage." Olivia met his gaze and smiled faintly. "Maybe not," she admitted, "but I believe everyone deserves kindness, Ethan, including you." Her words stayed with him long after she had retired for the night. For the first time in years, Ethan felt a spark of hope, though he wasn't sure why. Ethan woke early one morning, the faint light of dawn spilling through the small window in their modest quarters. He sat at the edge of the bed, staring at the worn leather journal in his hands. For years, it had been his only link to a life he barely remembered. The sketches, the cryptic notes, and the strange sense of familiarity they brought were fragments of a puzzle he couldn't solve. Olivia entered the room quietly, carrying a tray with 2 steaming cups of tea. She placed it on the small table and glanced at Ethan, noticing the faraway look in his eyes. "Are you all right?" she asked gently. Ethan hesitated, then nodded. "Just thinking." Olivia sat across from him, wrapping her hands around her cup. She noticed the journal in his lap and tilted her head curiously. "You carry that with you everywhere," she said with a soft smile. "What's in it?" Ethan hesitated again, then opened the journal and turned it toward her. "It's pieces of my past," he said quietly. "Things I don't fully understand." Olivia leaned in, studying the pages. The drawings caught her attention first, meticulously detailed sketches of places and objects. One drawing in particular made her pause. A grand manor with tall iron gates. "This place," Olivia murmured, tracing the lines with her finger. "It looks so familiar." Ethan's eyes flickered with surprise. "You've seen it before?" "I think so," she replied, her brow furrowed. "But I can't be certain. Where did you see it?" "I don't know," Ethan admitted. "It's been in my dreams for as long as I can remember. I drew it years ago, hoping it might help me remember something. But it hasn't." Before Olivia could respond, a sudden knock at the door interrupted them. Startled, Ethan quickly closed the journal and slid it under the bed. Olivia rose to answer the door, finding one of the maids standing nervously in the hallway. "Mrs. Olivia," the maid said, glancing over her shoulder, "Mrs. Victoria has summoned you to the parlour." Olivia sighed and nodded. "I'll be right there." Once the maid left, Olivia turned back to Ethan. "I have to go, but I want to hear more about your journal later. Maybe we can figure this out together." Ethan gave a small nod, watching her leave. When he was alone, he reached under the bed and pulled the journal back out. His hands lingered on the edges of the pages, his mind replaying Olivia's words. Later that day, as he walked through the garden to clear his thoughts, something caught his eye. A patch of dirt had been recently disturbed near the old oak tree. Curious, he knelt down and began to dig with his hands. After a few moments, his fingers brushed against something solid. Pulling it free, he found a tarnished silver locket, its surface engraved with an intricate design. It felt oddly familiar, like the sketches in his journal. Ethan held the locket tightly, his heart pounding. Was this another clue? And how had it ended up buried here? That night, Ethan couldn't sleep. The weight of what he and Olivia had overheard pressed heavily on his mind. Victoria's words replayed in his thoughts. "The family's gone, the fortune lost. I ensured that much." He sat by the dim glow of the single candle in their small room, the locket clutched tightly in his hand. He traced the intricate engraving on its surface, his mind racing. Could this heirloom be proof of the connection Victoria had tried to bury? And if so, what did that mean for him? Olivia stirred from her bed, noticing Ethan's troubled expression. She pulled a shawl around her shoulders and joined him at the small table. "You're still thinking about what we heard, aren't you?" she asked gently. Ethan nodded. "It doesn't make sense, Olivia. If Victoria had a hand in ruining some noble family, and if this locket is tied to them, why do I feel like I'm part of it?" Olivia studied him for a moment before reaching for the locket. She opened it again, her eyes lingering on the faded portrait. "Maybe it's not just the locket," she said thoughtfully. "The woman in this picture, there's something about her eyes. They remind me of yours." Ethan blinked in surprise. "You think she might be my mother?" "I don't know," Olivia admitted, "but I think we're closer to the truth than we realize. Victoria wouldn't speak so freely about something like this unless she thought no one was listening. She's hiding something, Ethan, and if we can figure out what it is, it might answer all your questions." The next day, Olivia suggested they search the manor for more clues. "Victoria's study," she said. "If she's hiding anything, it would be there." Ethan hesitated. "What if she catches us? You know what she's capable of." Olivia met his gaze, her expression steady. "I know, but this is important. If we can find something, anything, it could help us figure out your past. You deserve to know the truth." That evening, while the household was busy preparing for one of Victoria's grand dinners, Olivia and Ethan slipped quietly into the study. The room was dimly lit, its walls lined with shelves filled with books and ledgers. Olivia moved quickly to the large desk, opening drawers as silently as she could. Ethan scanned the shelves, his eyes catching on a small locked box tucked into a corner. "Olivia," he whispered, holding it up. "This might be it." She hurried over, examining the lock. "We need a key." They searched frantically but carefully, finally finding a small brass key hidden under a stack of letters. Ethan slid it into the lock, his hands shaking slightly as he turned it. Inside, they found a stack of old documents. Olivia picked up the top sheet, her eyes widening as she read aloud. "Estate transfer agreement, signed by Victoria and the Crestmore family." Ethan froze. Crestmore? That name? He trailed off, suddenly hit by a rush of fragmented memories. Laughter, a grand hall, a warm voice calling his name. "Ethan," Olivia said urgently, placing a hand on his arm. "Do you remember something?" I think I do," he murmured. And if I'm right, Victoria didn't just take their fortune. She took everything. Ethan sat in silence, staring at the documents in his hands. The name Crestmore seemed to glow on the yellowed paper, as though it held the key to everything he'd lost. His heart raced as fragmented memories began to sharpen, piecing together a life he had forgotten. Crestmore, he whispered, the word foreign yet familiar. I've heard that name before. It feels like it's part of me. Olivia placed a steady hand on his arm. Ethan, these papers, they're proof. Victoria was involved in something terrible. This transfer agreement. It shows she gained control of the Crestmore estate under suspicious circumstances. If your locket and journal are connected to that family... She trailed off, her expression full of both excitement and concern. Ethan swallowed hard, his voice shaking. If I'm tied to the Crestmores, that means she took everything from my family, my home, my future, my name. Olivia nodded, her brow furrowed. We need to dig deeper. If you're truly connected to this family, there has to be more proof somewhere. The next morning, while Victoria was away meeting with local society elites, Ethan and Olivia returned to the study. With renewed determination, they combed through drawers, shelves, and hidden compartments. Olivia uncovered an old ledger buried beneath a stack of correspondence. As she flipped through its pages, a particular entry caught her eye. "Look at this," she said, holding the ledger out to Ethan. Payments made to various lawyers and officials, all around the time the Crestmore estate changed hands. These amounts are enormous. It's like she was paying people off to cover her tracks. Ethan scanned the entries, his jaw tightening. She didn't just ruin my family. She made sure no one could question her rise to power. As they continued searching, Ethan came across an envelope sealed with wax. The crest stamped into the seal was identical to the design on his locket. His hands trembled as he opened it, revealing a letter written in a flowing, elegant hand. The letter was addressed to, "My dearest Ethan." Ethan's voice faltered as he read aloud, "My son, if you are reading this, it means something terrible has happened. Trust in what I have left you, the locket, the journal. They will guide you back to who you truly are. Do not let those who seek to destroy us win." The letter was unsigned, but the love and urgency in the words made Ethan's chest tighten. He clutched the paper, tears threatening to fall. "It's her," he whispered. "The woman in the locket. She's my mother." Olivia placed a comforting hand on his shoulder. "This is it, Ethan. This is the proof you've been missing. You're not just anyone. You're the rightful heir to the Crestmore estate." Ethan exhaled shakily, the weight of the revelation crashing over him. "She tried to erase me," he said, his voice low but steady. "Victoria thought she could steal everything and leave me with nothing. But she was wrong." Olivia met his gaze, her own eyes fierce with determination. "Then let's make it right. We'll find a way to reclaim what's yours, Ethan. She won't get away with this." For the first time in years, Ethan felt a sense of purpose. His life, once defined by struggle and uncertainty, now had a clear path forward. He didn't know how they would confront Victoria, but one thing was certain: the truth could no longer be hidden. Ethan stood in the grand hall of the manor, the morning light streaming through the high windows. The documents and the locket were safely tucked inside his coat, close to his chest. Beside him, Olivia's steady presence gave him courage. This was the moment they had been preparing for, the moment Victoria would face the truth. Victoria swept into the room with her usual air of superiority, her sharp gaze immediately settling on Ethan and Olivia. "What is the meaning of this?" she demanded, her voice cold. "I don't recall summoning either of you." Ethan stepped forward, his heart pounding but his voice steady. "We need to talk, Victoria. Or should I say, the woman who stole everything from the Crestmore family." For a split second, her expression faltered. A flicker of surprise crossed her face before she quickly masked it with disdain. "What nonsense is this? Have you been filling his head with foolish ideas, Olivia?" Olivia stood her ground. "This isn't nonsense, and you know it. We found the documents in your study, the ledger, the transfer agreement. They all prove what you did." Victoria's lips curled into a cold smile. "You think some old papers will scare me? They mean nothing. You're grasping at straws, and I won't entertain this ridiculous charade." Ethan pulled the locket from his pocket and held it up. "And what about this? The crest on this locket matches the seal on those documents. This belonged to my mother. You buried it, just like you tried to bury the truth." Victoria's eyes flicked to the locket, her composure wavering again. But she quickly recovered, laughing dismissively. "A trinket? You're pinning your identity on a trinket. How desperate." Ethan stepped closer, his voice rising. "You stole my family's fortune. You left me to fend for myself on the streets while you built your life on lies. You thought you could erase me, but you couldn't. I am Ethan Crestmore, and I'm here to take back what you stole." Victoria's face darkened, but before she could respond, a voice rang out from behind them. "Is that true, Victoria?" Everyone turned to see Mr. Henry, one of Victoria's most trusted allies, standing in the doorway. His expression was grave. "I heard rumours for years," he said, stepping into the room, "but I never wanted to believe them. Now it all makes sense. The sudden rise in your fortunes, the mysterious disappearance of the Crestmore family. Tell me, Victoria, is this why you kept everyone at arm's length?" Victoria's composure shattered. "This is absurd," she snapped. "You have no proof, none of you. Do you think anyone will believe the word of a beggar and a foolish girl?" But Henry stepped forward, his gaze steady. "You forget, Victoria. I was there when the Crestmores fell. I knew the boy's parents. That locket, it belonged to Lady Evelyn Crestmore. I'd recognise it anywhere." Murmurs spread as others gathered in the hall. Olivia had quietly summoned the staff, many of whom had overheard Victoria's cruel schemes over the years, but had been too afraid to speak. Now, emboldened by Ethan's determination, they began to step forward. "I remember the family," one of the older maids said softly. "The Crestmores were kind. Their downfall never made sense to me." Another added, "She silenced anyone who questioned it." We all knew better than to ask. Victoria backed away, her confident facade crumbling. You have no idea what it was like," she spat. "Do you think I enjoyed living in their shadow, always second best, always overlooked? I took what I deserved." Ethan's voice was calm but firm. "You didn't deserve it, Victoria. You stole it. And now the truth is out." As the crowd's murmurs grew louder, Victoria realised she had lost. The weight of her actions, exposed so publicly, left her no escape. She turned and fled the room, her world crashing down around her. Ethan stood tall, the heirloom in his hand glowing in the sunlight. Olivia stepped closer, her voice gentle. "You did it, Ethan. The truth is out." He nodded, a quiet determination in his eyes. "It's not over yet. There's still more to set right." The days following the confrontation were a whirlwind. Victoria's fall from grace was swift and unforgiving. With the truth laid bare, her supporters scattered, and her wealth was seized by the rightful heirs of the Crestmore estate. Ethan's name, once whispered only in the streets, now carried weight. But as the legal battles unfolded and the papers were signed, Ethan remained calm. His inheritance, the vast estate, and fortune were his by right, but he didn't feel the rush of victory he had once imagined. Instead, there was a quiet sense of relief, as if the last piece of a long and painful puzzle had finally clicked into place. One evening, as they stood on the balcony overlooking the Crestmore estate, Olivia turned to Ethan. "What will you do now?" she asked softly, her eyes searching his face. Ethan looked out across the vast land, the beauty of the rolling hills stretching before him. The mansion, which had once felt like a symbol of loss and betrayal, now stood as a reminder of his journey, not just to reclaim what was his, but to find peace. "I could use this wealth to make them pay," he said, his voice tinged with a quiet anger. "I could crush those who betrayed my family, take back every ounce of what was stolen. But that wouldn't make me feel better. It wouldn't bring my parents back or fix what's been broken." Olivia stood beside him, her gaze soft but determined. "So, what will you do?" Ethan turned to her, a slow smile crossing his face. "I want to make things right, not for revenge, but for redemption. There are people suffering, people who have nothing because of the choices others have made. If I have the power to change that, I will." Olivia's eyes sparkled with admiration. "That's a path I'll walk with you." And so, with the weight of his title settled upon him, Ethan set out to transform not only his own life, but the lives of those around him. He used his newfound fortune to build schools, fund orphanages, and provide jobs to those who had been discarded by society. He worked alongside Olivia, who had always known the struggles of the poor and the forgotten. Together, they became a force for good in the community, never forgetting where they had come from. The manor, once a cold and imposing symbol of his past, was transformed into a place of refuge for those in need. It was a far cry from the life he had once known, but it felt right. The mansion was no longer a place of power, it was a place of hope. Even as they worked to rebuild the community, Ethan never sought the public's praise. He remained humble, knowing that true change came not from grand gestures, but from small, consistent acts of kindness. The people who had once viewed him as nothing more than a beggar now looked at him with respect. But it wasn't his wealth or title that earned it. It was his compassion, his willingness to help those who had once been forgotten. In the evenings, after a long day of work, Ethan and Olivia would sit together, watching the sun set over the hills, content in the knowledge that they had chosen the right path. The pain of the past had not been erased, but it had been transformed into something greater, a chance to rebuild, not just for themselves, but for everyone around them. As they sat in the quiet of the evening, Ethan took Olivia's hand. "Thank you," he whispered, "for standing by me, for believing in me when I didn't know who I was." Olivia squeezed his hand, her smile warm. "We're not alone anymore, Ethan, and we never will be." Victoria's once powerful presence in society began to fade with every passing day. The grand gatherings, the glittering parties she had once hosted with such pride, now took place without her. The very circles she had tried so hard to infiltrate, to dominate, turned their backs on her in the wake of her exposure. At first, Victoria refused to believe it. She thought that, given time, the scandal would fade, that the whispers would quiet. But the truth had spread too far, too fast. Her connections, the wealthy families who had once eagerly vied for her favour, began to distance themselves. Letters arrived, polite but firm, severing ties that had once seemed unbreakable. Her money, once a constant source of power, had evaporated. The estate she had seized from the Crestmores was returned, and the wealth she had accumulated through deceit was seized by the law. Victoria was left with nothing but the ruins of her own ambition. Alone in her once grand home, Victoria wandered through the empty halls, the silence echoing her defeat. The lavish tapestries, the polished marble floors, the gilded furniture, once symbols of her victory, now seemed like cruel reminders of what she had lost. She had once thought of herself as untouchable, the woman who could manipulate anyone, who could always win. But now, in the stillness of her isolation, the weight of her actions pressed down on her. Every lie she had told, every betrayal she had committed, now felt like an unshakable burden. Victoria stood in front of the large mirror in her drawing room, staring at the reflection of the woman she had become. The face, that had once been the epitome of power and charm, now looked tired and worn, the sharp features softened by the years of scheming and deceit. There was no longer any pride in her eyes, only regret. She had destroyed the Crestma family to secure her own place in society, and in the end, she had destroyed herself. She thought of Ethan, the boy she had cast aside, the one she had tried to bury. How different things might have been if she had never taken that path. But the question was hollow now. She had made her choices, and now she had to live with them. Victoria's former allies no longer visited. The invitations stopped coming, and her once bustling household had grown quiet. She no longer had the influence to make people bow to her, to force them into compliance. She was a shadow of the woman she had once been, an outcast in the very society she had worked so hard to dominate. There were moments when she thought of confronting Ethan, of asking for his forgiveness, but the thought was fleeting. She knew deep down that nothing she could say would undo the damage she had caused. Her actions had been too far-reaching, the consequences too severe. The past was not something she could erase. Now, as the days stretched on, Victoria spent her time alone, wandering through the empty rooms of her home. Her thoughts a constant reminder of what she had lost. There was no one left to blame but herself. The once feared woman, who had controlled the lives of so many, was now a prisoner of her own choices, her isolation a reflection of the hollow life she had built. And in that silence, she began to understand the true cost of ambition, how it could leave you with everything, and yet, in the end, leave you with nothing at all. Ethan and Olivia's love grew stronger each day, a bond forged through shared struggles and mutual respect. The challenges they had faced together, the lies, the betrayals, the years of hardship, had not driven them apart. Instead, those trials had brought them closer, shaping their relationship into something unbreakable. One crisp morning, as the sun rose over the horizon, Ethan took Olivia's hand, leading her to a quiet spot in the garden. The mansion, once a symbol of his lost past, now felt like a place of beginnings rather than endings. Surrounded by flowers in full bloom, Ethan turned to Olivia, his heart full. "Olivia," he began softly, "these past months have shown me what really matters. It's not the title, not the fortune. It's the people we become and the good we can do for others." Olivia smiled, her eyes soft with understanding. "I feel the same way. We've both had our share of pain, but I've never felt more at peace than I do right now, standing here with you." Ethan paused, looking into her eyes, a deep love and gratitude filling him. "Then will you marry me, Olivia? Not out of duty, not because of what we've been through, but because I love you, and I want to spend the rest of my life with you?" Tears welled in Olivia's eyes as she nodded, her heart swelling with happiness. "Yes, Ethan. I want that too. I've never been more sure of anything." And so, their wedding was simple, yet beautiful. Surrounded by friends, the few who had stood by them throughout their journey, Ethan and Olivia exchanged vows in a ceremony filled with hope and new beginnings. It wasn't a grand affair, but to them, it was perfect. They had built something real and lasting, a love that didn't need wealth or status to thrive. As they settled into their new life together, Ethan and Olivia made a vow to use their resources and their influence for good. They established a charitable foundation dedicated to helping the homeless, the hungry, and the forgotten, those whose stories had been left untold. The foundation provided food, shelter, and job training, offering a second chance to those who needed it most. Ethan and Olivia worked alongside their staff, not just as leaders, but as active participants. They understood the struggles of the less fortunate better than most, and they were determined to make a difference. In the evenings, after long days of working on their charity's initiatives, they would return to the manor, their hearts full. The once empty halls now echoed with laughter, the sound of life, of hope, of new beginnings, As time passed, their foundation grew, touching more lives than they could have ever imagined. They spoke at events, sharing their story, not as a tale of triumph over adversity, but as a reminder that kindness, compassion, and love were the true measures of success. Ethan and Olivia's love became a beacon of light to those in need. Their shared journey, from struggle to redemption, became an inspiration for others. They showed the world that it was never too late to change, never too late to choose a better path, and that the greatest gift of all was the ability to lift others up. As they walked hand in hand through the garden one evening, watching the sunset paint the sky in brilliant hues, Ethan whispered, "I'm proud of what we've built, Olivia. Not the foundation, not the wealth, but the love we've created together." Olivia squeezed his hand, her voice soft but strong. "And it's only the beginning." Together, they faced the future with open hearts, knowing that no matter what came their way, they would always have each other and the power to make the world a little brighter. As the seasons changed, Ethan and Olivia continued their work, tirelessly supporting those in need. Their foundation flourished, but what mattered most to them wasn't the growth of their wealth or status. It was the people they helped, the lives they touched. They had learned that true fulfillment came not from what they possessed, but from what they gave. One afternoon, as they visited a local shelter to check on the children who had found refuge there, they came across a young boy sitting alone on a bench. His clothes were worn, his eyes tired, but there was a quiet strength about him. Ethan and Olivia approached, and the boy looked up at them with a mixture of curiosity and caution. "Hey there," Ethan said gently, sitting down beside him. "What's your name?" The boy hesitated for a moment before speaking. "Lucas," he whispered, his voice barely audible. "Well, Lucas," Olivia said softly, her tone warm, "you're not alone here. You're safe, and we're going to make sure you have everything you need." Lucas's eyes welled with tears, the weight of his hardships finally breaking through. He wiped his face quickly, embarrassed by his emotion. "It's okay," Olivia reassured him, her hand resting on his. "You don't have to hide it. We all go through hard times, but that doesn't mean things won't get better." Ethan nodded in agreement. "You're stronger than you think, Lucas, and we're here to help you find your way." The boy looked at them both, his face full of uncertainty. "How can I ever repay you? I don't have anything to give." Ethan smiled gently. "You don't have to repay us. It's not about what you have. It's about what you do with the second chance you've been given. When you're ready, you can help someone else. That's how kindness spreads." Over the next few weeks, Lucas began to open up to Ethan and Olivia. He was bright and eager to learn, and with their support, he started to regain the confidence he had lost. They enrolled him in a local school and provided him with the resources he needed to succeed. Lucas wasn't the only one they helped. There were countless others who had found hope through their actions, through their willingness to reach out and show kindness. But it was moments like this, small and quiet, that reminded Ethan and Olivia why they had started their journey in the first place. As they walked home that evening, hand in hand, the setting sun casting a warm glow over the horizon, Olivia turned to Ethan. "It's amazing how much one act of kindness can change everything," she said. Ethan squeezed her hand, a deep sense of peace filling him. "It's the only thing that ever really matters," he replied. "Compassion, love, these are the things that transform lives, that make a difference." Their journey had started in pain and hardship, but it had led them to something far greater, the ability to give back, to create a ripple of change in the world, one person at a time. And as they stood there, looking out at the world they were helping to rebuild, they knew that no matter the obstacles they might face in the future, their love and their shared belief in kindness would always light the way forward. The story of Ethan and Olivia was one of redemption, but more than that, it was a story of hope, a reminder that even in the darkest times, the smallest acts of compassion could bring about the greatest change.